Hello and welcome to the seventh meeting of the Voices in Vegan Studies speaker series brought to you by Arihanta Institute. My name is Jonathan Dickstein. I am a professor at Arihanta Institute and also the lead organizer of the Vegan Studies Initiative. So for those of you who are new to Arihanta Institute, completely, we are an academic institution dedicated to advancing education, scholarship, research, and public dissemination of the real-world application of the Jain principles of nonviolence and compassion. Our mission is to empower individuals to apply these principles for a force of change positively in their own communities to help address some of the pressing issues of our time. And for those of you who don't know much about Jainism or the Jain tradition or Jain traditions, one very key takeaway is that Jains are the oldest vegetarian community in the world, practicing and teaching animal-focused vegetarianism for over 2 millennia. And more recently, veganism has popped up on the ethical radar of Jains, both in India and in the diaspora, that is outside of India. There's also the Jain animal sanctuary, the Pundrapol, which is yet another centuries-old manifestation of this very, very serious Jain concern for the welfare of animals. In April of 2024, Arihanta launched the Vegan Studies Initiative to educate Jains and non-Jains alike about veganism and animal rights as expressions of multi-species nonviolence. Apart from our course offerings, of which there are many, of which Professor Larue is contributing next month, we also host special events like this one to elevate experts in the fields to share their in the fields of vegan studies and animal studies to share their experience, research, knowledge, and insights with the public at large. All of this information about the Vegan Studies Initiative and what we do overall at Arihanta Institute is available at our site, arihantainstitute.org. So now let's pivot to today's speaker, Dr. Renan Larue. Renan Larue is a French literary scholar and historian of vegetarianism. He is the author of 6 books on animal rights, vegetarianism, and veganism, including Vegetarianism and Its Enemies, a history of vegetarianism from Pythagoras until the present day. More recently, he has published the Vegan Anthology, 100 Essential Texts. And also in 2016, he offered the first course in vegan studies in the United States at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where we met actually when I was also at that university. Today's talk is titled The Philosophical Bases of Veganism in the Ancient Western World. And I want to immediately flag that Dr. Larue is also teaching a more in-depth 6-hour self-study course on this topic that launches in about a month from now on November 18th. So definitely keep your eyes on this offering as well. It's a way to actually delve into the primary sources, into the secondary sources, and have a much more nuanced understanding of this topic. Now, as for the talk today, vegetarianism and even veganism are not recent lifestyles in Europe. Indeed, animal ethics and its practical consequences, such as the refusal to hunt, to honor deities with blood sacrifices, and to consume meat and other animal products, are as old as the West itself. We find traces of it among the first Greek philosophers, Empedocles and Pythagoras, at the end of the 6th century BC. Throughout antiquity, the Pythagorean diet was passionately advocated and, by contrast, forcefully rejected. These are the types of topics that we will study during this session. We will see that although some arguments put forward by both sides may appear absurd today, others are sophisticated and persuasive and share much in common with contemporary discourses in favor of animal rights. This talk will be followed by a Q&A session, so please drop your questions, comments in the Q&A box throughout the talk, and I will get to as many of them as possible. And now, Dr. Renan Larue, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for the for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here virtually with everybody, and happy to talk about my friends, the Greek and Roman vegetarians of the past. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Is it working? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm going to talk about the ancient Western world. And the first thing I would like to highlight is the fact that there is something surprising when you work on the history of vegetarianism or veganism in the West. One of the first things you learn is the fact that there is a history of veganism in the West. So obviously, we know that there are many strong traditions in India, for instance, strong traditions of animal welfare, animal ethics, reflections about the soul of animals, our duty is not to harm them or kill them or eat them. But in the West, it's more counterintuitive, let's say, as the West has a very, very strong anthropocentric worldview, and it's more difficult to find, vegetarians and vegans in the Western civilization. So the history of Western veganism or vegetarianism is not only long, very long, but also extremely rich. We find a lot of prominent thinkers who address the question. So we have vegetarians, some vegans as well, offering extremely smart and astute and deep arguments in favor of animal rights. And on the other side, you would have also carnists or adversaries of vegetarianism who would also provide interesting counter arguments. So that's something I've been interested in. So not only the vegetarian history of the vegetarian arguments, but also all the debates around animal rights and a plant-based diet. Yeah, as Jonathan just said in the introduction, the history is very long, and you will find authors, thinkers like Empedocles, who started to talk about animal rights from the 5th century BCE onward. So it's been 25 centuries now, even in the West. And what was another thing I was surprised with when I started to talk and to do research about the history of vegetarianism, there were some very strong resistance. There was strong resistance among scholars. So I started to work on the problem at the end, in 2000, 2001. And when I was reading about the topic, I read that even the texts that were clearly in favor of vegetarianism were commented on in a negative way. So it was not possible that those authors actually talked about vegetarianism. Anyway, so you would find, for instance, in the Metamorphoses by Ovid, maybe the most beautiful plea in favor of vegetarianism. Even this text that is extremely clear, you would find people like Jean-Paul Brisson, a French scholar, who said, no, it's not possible. It cannot be serious. Here, the author Ovid is not talking about animal rights because everybody knows that it's childish, but he's talking about, this is a very long metaphor about the political system in Rome back then. So I'm going to share the quote in question. So it's just the beginning of a beautiful excerpt by Ovid. Human beings, stop desecrating your bodies with impious foodstuffs. There are crops, there are apples weighing down the branches and ripening grapes on the vines. There are flavorsome herbs, and those that can be rendered mild and gentle over the flames. The earth, prodigal of its wealth, supplies you with gentle sustenance and offers you food without killing or shedding blood. Flesh satisfies the wild beast's hunger, though not all of them, since horses, sheep, and cattle live on grasses. but those that are wild and savage. Armenian tigers, raging lions, and wolves and bears enjoy food wet with blood. Oh, how wrong it is for flesh to be made from flesh, for a greedy body to fatten by swallowing another body, for one creature to live by the death of another creature. So amongst such riches that earth, the greatest of mothers, yields, you are not happy unless you tear with cruel teeth at pitiful wounds, recalling Cyclops' practice, and you cannot satisfy your voracious appetite and your restless hunger unless you destroy other life. So the text goes on and on. It's really, maybe, I think it's the most beautiful, poetic plea of vegetarianism. And you would find, again, some authors saying, no, it's not possible. So you have, of course, a very strong prejudice amongst scholars when they had to address those questions. It's the case with this text and antiquity in general. I had the same problem when I was working on 18th century. Very clear text, and again, people denied it would be possible. Something else I would like to highlight, the fact that we don't have so many studies on vegetarianism and veganism in the ancient West. I worked a little bit on the question. Before me, the Vegetarian Society at the end of the 19th century, a couple of people from the Vegetarian Society worked on an anthology of texts about vegetarianism and animal rights. So it's not really like a study, it's more like a anthology with some comments. That was still interesting, a good starting point. A German philosopher, Johannes Hausleiter, wrote a book called Vegetarianism in the Ancient West. The book is not very, very good, but it has a good thing. A good thing with the book is the fact it can create a map of vegetarians in the West. Gary Steiner in the US wrote Anthropocentrism and its discontents. So there are only 1 or 2 chapters about the ancient world, but it's still, an attempt to understand animal rights and all the debates around animal rights in Greece and Rome. So the fact that there are so few studies on the topic is a pity, because the text on veganism and animal rights are really beautiful. So you had a taste with Ovid, but they are extremely inspiring, beautiful, moving, deep. So it's really a pity that this question is not more well known. And those texts are not written by minor authors. It's pretty much the opposite. We have prominent authors in Greece and Rome who address the question. So Empedocles, maybe one of the very first Greek philosophers, Theophrastus, maybe the best philosopher in Aristotle's school, probably even better than Aristotle himself. Ovid, whom I just mentioned, who is with Virgil, one of the 2 best poets in Rome for 800 years. So he's really like the most prestigious, one of the 2 most prestigious writers. Seneca, a famous politician and a Roman thinker. Plutarch, in the 2nd century. Philostratus, a little bit later. Porphyry, who wrote an encyclopedia of vegetarianism, and we're going to talk about him in 30 minutes or so. So yeah, beautiful theme addressed by amazing author. So it's really a pity that this history is not better known. So I'm going to start maybe with the first thinker who addressed the question during the 5th century. We have some authors maybe a little bit earlier, but we don't have direct testimony. We don't have direct quotes from them, but we have direct quotes from Empedocles. Empedocles wrote a book called The Purifications, and we don't have the whole book, but we have a lot of fragments because Greek and Roman philosophers, writers, historians would use the book and quote the book, here and there. So we have a collection of fragments, and Empedocles was clearly a vegetarian, probably even a vegan. And here are 2 interesting fragments when it comes to animal rights. Won't you stop this harsh, destructive slaughter? don't you see that you are tearing each other apart without thinking? And another thing that is even more graphic, let's say, or blunt. And the father lifts up his own son, now transformed. So, of course, Empedocles believed in reincarnation, and more globally in interconnectedness with everything in the universe. So if you kill your neighbor, if you kill your siblings, if you kill animals, if you destroy trees just because you like to destroy trees, you are creating something extremely negative in the universe, and you are actually hurting yourself because you are a part of this whole big web, let's say. So the father is going to sacrifice his own son, and kills him while offering a prayer. What a deluded fool. The victims run to the sacrificers, pleading for mercy, but he, deaf to their cries, slaughters them in his halls and prepares the wicked feast. Similarly, the son captures his father, and children do the same to their mother, taking their lives and consuming the flesh of their own kin. So, yeah, the whole idea of blood sacrifice is just totally idiotic, let's say, and counterproductive, and even blasphemous, because you are killing, other members of your community. You are hurting yourself, and you believe or you think that that's something the gods want. And yeah, so we have a lot of ghostly. There were a lot of debates between vegetarians and people who want to keep the system of the blood sacrifices. So Empedocles may be the first quotes about those questions. So Empedocles was one of the most ancient, but he was not the most prominent. The most prominent one was this man, Pythagoras, who lived during the 6th century. He's very often he's depicted like the inventor of Greek vegetarianism. He was a mathematician, obviously. He was also a medical doctor, astronomer, astrologist. He was mainly a philosopher. He even created the concept of philosophy, he coined the word philosophy. He said, "I'm not a wise man. I'm not wise. I'm not a sophos in Greek. I am a philosophos. I love wisdom, or I'm attracted to wisdom. So I'm trying to be wiser." And he coined the concept of philosophy. And the thing you have to do when you want to be a philosopher, when you are seeking wisdom, the first thing you have to do in your life is not taking the life of others. So it was very, very, very simple. He created a extremely important school in antiquity. So he's from Samos, a little Greek island, but then he moved to the south of Italy, where he created an extremely prestigious school that lasted almost 1,000 years, 900 years, until the end of antiquity, because you will have people like Porphyry, for instance, who says, "I am a Pythagorean. I am a disciple of Pythagoras." So in that school, you have different things you have to follow. One of the main things is adopting a plant-based diet, or a vegetarian diet at the very least. We don't have many direct testimonies about Pythagoras, but we have tons of testimonies about Pythagoreans, like really a lot of things. So it can be like paragraphs or a couple of pages. Very often it's like a couple of fragments, or you have people talking to Pythagorean and they're asking, "Oh, why don't you want to eat animals?" So the Pythagorean will explain more or less. And there will be a lot of conversations about that. But clearly, in Greece, Pythagorean diet means vegetarianism, or Pythagorean way of life means adopting a vegetarian lifestyle. So there are a lot of testimonies, as I said. Sometimes they are a little bit, the overlap is not perfect. Sometimes it works very well together. But if you do the map, if you read all the fragments and you sort them out, you will realize that there are 4 main pillars for this kind of vegetarianism. The first thing is renunciation of material things. So sometimes you would find disciples of Pythagoras who say, "Oh, I don't drink wine. I don't want to kill animals. I'm not interested in blood sacrifices. I don't eat meat. But that's not for everybody. I am a philosopher. I'm seeking truth. I want to become wise. And I know that eating those things not only is not good for my body, but it's not good for my soul. It's not good for my intellect. So I need to eat light food and frugal food, and it will make me smarter, wiser, more inspired, and so on and so forth. Okay, so renunciation of material things, and of course, the meat is perceived as something that is very, very heavy materially. So it's not good for your soul. It's too heavy. It's heavy for your body, and it's not, and also too heavy for your soul. The second thing is the fact that meat is impure. Blood is impure in general. So if you are in contact with blood or something that is linked to violence in some way or another, it's not pure. So if you want to protect yourself from impurities, you absolutely have to avoid meat and fish, obviously. The third thing, the fact that Pythagoras and at least a lot of his disciples believed in reincarnation, metempsychosis. So the soul can travel through different bodies. So if you are killing a chicken or a cow, you might kill one of your ancestors. Okay, so you are actually destroying a soul, or you are harming a being that is animated by a soul, and that's something horrifying. And the last one, it's actually the most prominent one, it's concern for animal well-being, and you will have a lot of things about that. So it's very rare to see something about Pythagoras and his vegetarianism not linked with animal well-being. Sometimes it's linked also to reincarnation or purity, but 95% of the time, really there is a concern for animal well-being, which is, I think, interesting. Yeah, so this is so Pythagoras was famous in antiquity. He was also extremely famous until the 18th or 19th century. Everybody who would interested in plant-based diets or vegetarianism or animal rights would mention Pythagoras and his teaching. So this is a painting by Rubens at the beginning of the 17th century, and you see Pythagoras teaching his disciples that there was an abundance of nuts, fruits, vegetables, etc. you can eat, and you don't have to kill animals. So you see on the right all those nymphs and satyrs who are gathering food, and they are symbols of fertility. So there is so much food you can eat. And as Ovid said, not only you can eat the fruits directly, but thanks to the technique with the flame, as he said, you can cook those fruits and plants. And the variety is then huge. So with nature plus culture, nature plus the technique, I mean, you don't miss anything. You don't miss anything. So on the left of the painting, people are like, this is counterintuitive. This is smart, but I don't know, I'm confused. And you see this guy, the second guy on the left, he's looking at you like, what do you think? What should you do? There's a beautiful painting. It's in Buckingham Palace. So I wish I could see it in person. Okay, so who was the disciples? Was Pythagoras a vegan? And what about his disciples? So the majority of testimonies we have don't really show something vegan. Only a minority of testimonies. So I picked two here. Usually, the vegetarians or people concerned with animal ethics would say we cannot be vegan. We have to collaborate with animals. So animals will give us milk, for instance, or eggs, and we will protect them in return. It's that's the case for Porphyry, for instance. You would imagine a system that is close to the zoopolis. So it would be like a vegan society, let's say, because there is no harm towards animals, but it's not on the plant-based diet. You don't have a plant-based diet because you can take the milk. It's the idea that animals, we work for animals. For instance, a beekeeper is helping the bees. They create the beehive, the house. They put a lot of flowers around the beehive, and so on and so forth. They protect the bees from parasites, for instance. So actually, the beekeeper is an employee of the bees, and he deserves a salary, and the salary will be the honey, every year in August. So this is the idea he had, and you find that idea in other texts, but mainly in Porphyry's text. So what was he a vegan, or what are the testimonies about that? So I picked two, something from Philostratus, who wrote the life of Apollonius. Apollonius was a legendary thinker and a miracle maker from the second century, and he is clearly on a plant-based diet, and he doesn't want to wear wool either because it comes from animals. He doesn't want to wear leather. He would use the bark of the tree in to make shoes like that, because again, if the wool or anything that comes from animals implies for him some form of exploitation and or violence, and it's impure. If you really want to be pure, you don't want to touch anything that is related again to violence or exploitation. So he's talking to someone who is making fun of him, let's say, because he's wearing something in linen. In what way is linen better than wool? Was not the latter taken from the back of the genitals of animals, of a creature beloved of the gods? So just a short excerpt. I have the whole excerpt on where we address the whole excerpt during the course. And another one from Porphyry talking about Plotinus. So Plotinus was the head of the Neoplatonist school during the 2nd century in Rome. Back then, he was by far the most famous philosopher. And Plotinus didn't want to take medicines based on animal products, because he said, I don't want to take the life of others to sustain my own life. It wouldn't be ethical. So you will have the same concern with modern thinkers, obviously. And with Gandhi, there was a lot of pages by Gandhi in his autobiography and other texts when he's talking about that. He doesn't want to drink milk or to eat milk, even though he would need the protein in the milk, and a lot of reflections about those questions. So Porphyry wrote the life of Plotinus. Plotinus was his actually guru or master in philosophy. Plotinus was often distressed by an intestinal complaint, but he refused to such medicaments as contained any substance taken from the wild beasts or reptiles. All the more, he remarked, since he could not approve of eating the flesh of animals reared for the table. So I think it's pretty interesting. So you really have in the West people who really had the same question that vegans have today, clearly. Can I take this medicine? It's made out of like some parts of the body or substance from an animal. Is it ethical or not? So those questions were already addressed. They're very, very old, actually. We were not the first. We're not the first one to check the ingredients at the supermarkets. Okay, so based on this school, the Pythagorean school, because of that school and its success, you really have to understand that Pythagoras was extremely prestigious. So today we think that Plato or Socrates are the most prestigious philosophers in the West, but for Socrates and Plato and a lot of philosophers, the real hero of philosophy is Pythagoras. So the school he created was extremely prestigious, and other schools were, of course, created. They would disagree with him, and they were like a fight. Very, very interesting debates for, again, almost 1,000 years. So on one end, you would have people who would agree with Empedocles and his view about this interconnectedness between beings, affairs. Or I don't have time to talk about him, but he was also a legendary thinker. He really also believed in reincarnation, and if you eat an animal, you are going to it's not going to be very good for your karma. So they don't talk about karma, but it's more or less the same idea. And of course, Pythagoras. And on the other end, you will have the proponents of carnism, the Epicureans, but also mainly the Stoics. You would find other people, some people who would follow Aristotle, but Aristotle is not very clear when it comes to animal rights. It's a bit, he says two different things, basically. But Epicureans and Stoics, for different reasons, agree with the fact that we shouldn't give rights to animals. Something that has also to be kept in mind, the fact that even though the Stoics and Epicureans would disagree with Pythagoras, on a daily basis, their diet would be extremely frugal and would be more or less like a vegetarian diet. So that's something Porphyry explains. Epicurus was on a vegetarian diet very, very often. Why? Because meat is not good for your mind. It's not good for your brain. If you eat too much, if the food is too rich, too healthy, too rich, too heavy, again, it's not good for your intellect. And you want to be able to control yourself, your body, and you want to have lighter ideas, and meat is not good for that. But they would totally disagree on the principles, on the moral principles. So the Stoics and the Epicureans, I'm talking about the scholars, the thinkers, the philosophers. You have also, of course, a strong counter reaction from the majority of people, like farmers, obviously, soldiers, like the real Greek and Roman people would disagree with vegetarianism for different reasons. First, because it seems absurd. So why would you deprive yourself from the tastiest food, which is meat? Also, because meat is associated with blood sacrifices, and usually a blood sacrifice happens when there is a ceremony, a celebration, a holiday, or something like that. If your daughter gets married, you will have a big blood sacrifice. So if you don't want to eat meat, you don't want to participate in this feast, which is a bit ridiculous, and it makes you like a joy killer, basically. So a lot of things, but the blood sacrifice is because it's associated with a party, let's say, but also because it's associated with the religious way to talk to communicate with the gods. So if you don't, if you disagree with the principle of the blood sacrifice, obviously you're not going to be a very good citizen or a very pious person, according to the majority of ancient Greeks and Romans. And Alexei, for instance, during the 4th century BCE, he was interested in those questions, and he wrote he wrote many plays, more than 100, but there are at least 2 plays. He's a playwright dedicated to Pythagoreans, and he actually makes fun of them. So it's like you would have like this caricature of a vegetarian, a Pythagorean, and everybody will make fun of them. So they would be ridiculed on stage, and people would laugh at them. I picked two. Excerpts. So people are talking about Pythagoreans. By the gods, are we to believe that the Pythagoreans of old willingly and themselves become so filthy, or that they gladly took up wearing their coarse peasant clothes? In my opinion, that's not the case at all. It was out of necessity, because they didn't have a penny, that they invented this marvelous excuse for frugality and set practical limits for the poor. Serve them some fish or meat, and I swear 10 times over that they would eat it up, even down to their fingers. Okay, so vegetarians are just hypocrites. They are basically losers, and they want to transform their lack of money as something beautiful. Okay, so that's one thing, and everybody would laugh in the audience. And another one from the man from Tarentum: those who lead a Pythagorean life, as they say, eat no meat, nor anything that has life, and they alone among men do not drink wine. Yet Epicarides devours dogs, and he's one of the Pythagoreans. Yes, but he kills them first, so that they are no longer something that has life. Okay. I don't think it's extremely funny, but it actually shows that there is this strong reaction, this vegaphobia, let's say, or um, this idea that obviously don't want to be like one of those Pythagoreans, absolutely ridiculous. It also shows that the Pythagorean way of life or philosophy was popular then also, because you have to make fun of them. If they were only like 1% of the population or even less than that, you wouldn't find any plays about them. The fact that there are plays against vegetarians shows that their philosophy was well known, or their preachers were well known. So this was the common reaction, let's say. There is also obviously the most a more philosophical response to the vegetarian arguments. So I'm not going to have time to talk about Epicureans, but I would like to say a few words about the Stoics. So the Stoic school was founded by Zeno, and a few decades later, Chrysippus became the head of the Stoic school, and he wrote more about animals than Zeno did. And he has his views about animals, and also the question of justice, rights, how the world is, the universe, the world is organized. All those things are of interest for him. And he talks a lot about animals. He would totally disagree with Pythagoras. For him, the whole universe has been created for us, for the sake of the human race. And the sun, the moon, the trees, the rivers, the stars, plants, and obviously animals have been created for us. They are only tools, they are only weapons to our only a means to our end. So we have a couple of things from him, but most of the Stoic philosophy is due to Roman thinkers who translated and or commented extensively on Chrysippus' work. So Cicero, for instance, wrote a lot about the Stoic philosophy and explained what Chrysippus had in mind when it comes to animals and the way the world is organized. It would be tedious to enumerate the advantages which were undeniably provided for human use of the mule and of the ass. As for the pig, it possesses no utility beyond that of furnishing food. In fact, Chrysippus says that its very life was given it in place of salt, that it might not become rotten. Okay, so we had no fridge back then, so the fact that you would use salt to preserve the meat. So that's why the flesh of pigs is naturally salty, because it's easier to preserve, and it makes it better. So the gods knew that we would eat pigs, so that's why the flesh of pig is salty and delicious. Since it was well adapted for human consumption, nature made it the most prolific animal that she produced. Need I mention the numbers and the delicious taste of birds and fishes? So he goes on and on. And also Chrysippus would say that the neck of oxen were designed by the gods for the yoke to be put on them. So everything has been created for us. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. You don't understand anything. So animals are only means to our end, and animals, because they are, according to Chrysippus and the Stoics, they are aloga, which means they are deprived from logos. They don't have logos. They don't have rationality. They cannot articulate anything verbally or also in their mind. Okay, for Chrysippus and the Stoicians, only logikoi have rights. Logikoi mean being with logos. So only two kinds of beings in the universe have logos: the gods who created everything, and human beings. And the gift we receive from the gods is logos. That's one thing, and of course, animals don't have that, so they are on another level, let's say. Something else, the fact that human beings belong to the same family. That's something that was really, it was very interesting. So Stoicians would disagree with the common perception of slavery, let's say. For Stoicians, there is a very strong bond between human beings. It starts with the mother and the child, because the child, when the baby is born, is at the same time a part of the bodies of the mother's body, because the baby was in the body, in the womb, and the baby was the was the mother itself, herself, and then the baby becomes autonomous. So during this moment, the transition, for the Stoicians, this transition is interesting because someone else, you see someone that is different from you, but that is you, or that was you like a few minutes before, or a few hours or weeks before. So this is a key moment, because you realize that someone else is actually yourself. And this is what you do with your kids, the way you see your kids, but then also your siblings, your family, your neighbors, the people from your country, and also the whole human race. We are all members of the same family. And we are all members of the same family because we have something very unique. We have something very special in us, our rationality. So you cannot see another human being as a foreigner. We are all brothers and sisters between, or we are all citizens of the world. That's, this idea of citizenship of the world is a very Stoic idea. So when you do that, you obviously has to fight the question of prejudice against other people, against other nations, against people from other race. And the slavery doesn't work either. It's not, you cannot justify slavery. So you can have employees, those people can work for you, but they deserve a good salary. What the Stoics did, they destroyed the walls between human beings, okay? Between Greeks and non-Greeks, between white and black, etc., etc. So they destroyed these walls. But in order to create a stronger bond between human beings, they had to erect a huge wall between the human race and the rest of the universe. You would find the same process with Christianity, basically. So the consequence of that is you have to, really create a big gap between animals and human beings. And again, because logos is so important, and because animals are deprived from logos, you can use them as much as you want. Number one, they have been created for our end, and number two, they have no logos, so they are not our family. You don't owe them anything. So he develops a little bit like more. You cannot have reciprocity also. You can have reciprocity with your kids, your neighbors, and even people, on the other side of the world, because you can communicate, because we have logos in common. We can reciprocate. It's not the case with animals, according to the Stoics. So these ideas has been adopted by the fathers of the church, and especially who with Saint Augustine, or Augustine of Hippo, during the 4th and early 5th century. These ideas were totally adopted by the church and spread. So that's something that is very interesting when you study antiquity, especially these 2 or 3, 4 first centuries after Jesus, because this is the moment where, in the West at least, the Western civilization was shaped, was created. And this guy, Saint Augustine, when it comes to the role of human beings in the universe, the role of the human beings towards animals or nature in general, has been totally, mainly shaped by Saint Augustine, who was heavily influenced by the Stoics. So the very anthropocentric worldview the Stoics had is extremely close to what we have now. When people say, oh, that's the way things are, animals are here for us, these ideas have a history, and it comes from the Stoics, the success of their theories, and then, more importantly, the success of the Christian church. So I would like to say a few words about porphyry. I would like to give you some examples of vegetarian arguments, let's say. Porphyry wrote a book called treaty on abstinence from animal from animal food. There's a typo, from animal food. The book was written in 266 Common Era, and you can read the book as a sort of encyclopedia of vegetarianism. So it's the longest by far a book about vegetarianism we have written in Greek, also in Latin. The book is divided in 4 parts, and in the first part, he would create like make a list of all the arguments used against vegetarians. Okay, so it's more or less like, have you heard of the bingo of carnists? So it's more or less this idea. So all the most common things you would hear about vegetarians and of veganism. So some arguments are very silly. Some others are more interesting. So yeah, you have a you have a glimpse. And so what Porphyry does is the following. So I'm going to mention and develop all the arguments against vegetarianism. I will pick the best ones, and then I'm going to reply in the 3 other parts of the book. Okay. So he says, I'm not afraid of those counter arguments. And I'm going to pick the best ones. And then I will show you that these arguments are totally unsound or even silly. So I picked 1 or 2. Yes, the most important one is animals cannot neither talk nor think. So that's the idea put forward by the Stoics. And for him, it's not true. It's just not true. And he said, well, okay, the Stoics, let's say that you are right. Let's say that you can only have right if you have reason, if you have logos. Now I'm going to show you that animals have logos. So he's going to talk about the way we can tame some animals, the way hunters can understand their dogs when the dogs are barking. Porphyry himself had a partridge for a few months. He was able to communicate with the partridge. We have so many examples of animals learning things. You can teach your dog different tricks, which means that the dog has memory and also have some logos, because he's able to combine different things. You can understand his or her name. I mean, they can understand the name and then the actual order. And the communication can be extremely much, not very deep, but can be deep enough to prove that animals have reason. So if they have reason, Stoics should grant them some fundamental rights. So that's the whole argument in the 3rd part of the book. And I'm going to talk about this argument in details in the course. Something also very, very interesting, the critique of blood sacrifice by Porphyry. He said that the whole question of blood sacrifice is totally ludicrous. Religion is just a pretext for us to eat meat. So we feel guilty, we know it's horrifying, and we need the best alibi. And the best alibi is that, oh, it's not me. The gods want us to kill animals and eat them. So we are not responsible for that. So a lot of very, very astute arguments, and just one of them here, the fact that we don't sacrifice animals we don't eat. Okay. Who has ever sacrificed snakes or scorpions or monkeys or any other such creature? We do not abstain from any of the creatures which are of some use to us or have in them some source of enjoyment. We slaughter them and flay them as a show of honor to the divine. So this is extremely controversial at that time. The blood sacrifice, which is the core of the Greek religion, is the epitome of a blasphemy. It's a blasphemy. We are destroying God's creatures, animals who are innocent. A sacrifice is supposed to be something you sacrifice from you. So you give something that is yours. So you can give your grains, you can give cookies, you can give money. you can give things like that because those things belong to you. You have created them. But when you give the life of an animal, you're giving something that doesn't belong to you. So you are stealing something, and something that is the most important. So the whole blood sacrifice is horrific. It just shouldn't exist, and religion is blasphemous. Religious is blasphemous. So this is one of the insane or most radical consequences a vegetarian way of life or vegetarian philosophy can have. It seems anecdotal because it's just about food, but when you dig a little bit further, you realize that it can be a huge threat to the political system or the religious system. There are a lot of very, very interesting arguments in Porphyry's text. I like what he says about anthropocentrism. So he would totally disagree with the Stoics, as you can imagine, and the whole idea of the food chain is for him ridiculous. Again, the idea we are the apex, we are the alpha, we are the peak of the food chain, which shows that everything has been created for us, right? It's another piece of evidence. And Porphyry agrees. He said, "Oh, okay, you're right. If you are the top of the food chain, it means that the world has been created for you." Okay, so this is the food chain according to the Stoics. I took it from the Simpsons, but it's more or less the same idea. It's pretty accurate. And Porphyry would say, "Well, this doesn't make any sense. This is the food chain." I took it from the Revenant. The food chain is we are average. You have a lot of animals like sharks or bears who are higher in the food chain. So the conclusion to that would be, the whole universe has been created by the gods, and the gods put the bears at the very top of everything. We instead of anthropocentrism, we should create bear centrism because they are the highest in the hierarchy. And he says this is absurd. Your place in the food chain doesn't say anything about the status in the universe. And another argument, I took it from ChatGPT. This one is another argument by Porphyry, the fact that we only know a small fraction of animals around us. The vast majority of animals are in the ocean. We cannot go there. We cannot dive deep enough to see those animals. So they are totally useless for us. So how come they have been created by gods? We don't use them. And another argument is the fact that there are also so many animals that are annoying, disgusting, they stink, they attack us, they can hurt us. It clearly shows that we are not at the center. Otherwise, gods wouldn't have created mosquitoes. Okay, so that's that's a very, I think, funny and relevant argument. Also, something there are tons of arguments, but one of I wanted to mention something about the soul. So it's just like very quickly. Porphyry would say that animals are not different fundamentally from us. There is no like ontological or metaphysical gap between animals and us. The difference in the mind or the reason is just different in terms of degrees, not in terms of nature. We are more or less like animals, or they are more or less like us because we have the same dual nature. We have a soul, obviously, and we have a body. Animals, it's the same case for animals. Okay. And very often, according to Porphyry, we don't understand how the soul works, how human beings work. We have a soul and we have this body. The soul is more or less like a software, and the body is the hardware. The software is the same, but based on the body it's going to inhabit, let's say, the software will not work the same way. So in for human beings, our body is very good for intellect. So our soul is going to be very good, with intellectual things, religion, philosophy, mathematics, politics, and things like that. But for animals, they're not the body is not good enough to do that, but they are better at so many other things. They can have better memory, they can have a better sense of smell, they can fly better, they can do a lot of things much better. Like bees, for instance, they create beautiful architectures, so they are better at us at architecture. Okay, because the body works well with the soul when it comes to creating architecture. Okay, so if you don't understand that, of course you will think that animals are inferior to you, but there is no fundamental difference. Everything is connected, and it's just the differences are just apparent. Okay, so before I jump to the, oh, I'm almost on time, perfect. Before we jump to the conclusion, I would like to do three remarks based on what I just said, and also more globally about my studies on vegetarianism and veganism in Greece and Rome. Three remarks, so we can discuss them if you want. The first one will be more about general observation. The second one will be about vegetarianism in the past, and the third one more about today. So one thing, we realize that even in the West, where carnism is so strong, so prevalent, we have evidence of vegetarians and vegans. Vegetarians and vegans have been a minority, from the beginning of time, let's say, from the 6th century on, but they were always there. It's a permanent phenomenon. Okay, that's one thing. The fact also vegans, it's less true now because we have internet, forums, we have festivals and things like that, or institutes, where vegetarians and vegans can meet and exchange ideas. So we are not alone. That's one thing. And when you study the vegetarianism from the past, you also realize that you are not alone because we belong to a very long history. People from the past, the 18th century, Middle Ages, the end of antiquity, Empedocles and others, we share the same ideas. We share the same views. Maybe not on everything, but the principle, we would agree on that. And I think it's very uplifting. It's very beautiful to realize that we belong to a long family. And yeah, I think that's something, I think at least for me, it's comforting, let's say. Something else also, of course, there are some arguments that seem very strange today. I didn't mention some of them by Porphyry, but 80% of the time, 70-80% of the time, you would see that pro-vegetarian arguments are consistent through time. Like basically, you shouldn't kill other creatures, or they can suffer, so you shouldn't do that. Or animals are not that silly than you think, or deprived from reason than you think. So there is this consistency also. Second remark about the past. Yeah, so the what happened also, the fact that there were, of course, like the average Greeks or Romans would make fun of vegetarians, clearly, but philosophers of the past wouldn't. They would take the question very, very seriously, hence the many responses they wrote about animal rights. They had to justify not only the diet, but animal exploitation in general. So that's something. And again, like the general public, I would say, would critique, would make fun of vegetarians with more or less the same arguments as today. Like all the cliches about, oh, they are boring, they're crazy, they want to impose their views on others, they are holier than thou, and so on and so forth. So that's something else. The third remark is about more about today, because you can understand today's specificities when it comes to vegetarianism and veganism when you can compare with the past, at least in the West. Something that you would never see in antiquity, all the things related to the environment. The only arguments linked to the environment, like the impact of animal agriculture on the environment, usually you would find these arguments against vegetarians. You would find Stoics or Epicureans who would say, if you don't exploit, kill animals are going to overcome our cities, are going to destroy our civilization. And it's dangerous. You have to control nature because nature is not very balanced and we can disappear as a civilization. Today, obviously, the arguments in favor of a plant-based diet are extremely strong and also very, very new. This is like it just started like 40 or 50 years ago. When you study the history in general, it's a very, very new phenomenon. Another thing, the fact that today, even if you are not Christian or if you are post-Christian or if you live in the West, you are influenced by these ideas created by the Stoics to the 2500 years ago. Okay, so even if we don't read the Stoics anymore, even if you don't believe in the Bible, you still think like a Christian from the 4th century when it comes to animals and nature. So there is what I call a popular triumph of humanism and anthropocentrism. We still believe, we still see the universe the way the Stoics did a long, long time ago, which is a bit strange, and which also leads to some form of intellectual schizophrenia. We live in a very, very Darwinian scientific framework. We believe Darwin, so we are like first bacteria and bigger animals, and then primates, and then human beings, and we are connected to each other. We're not unique in the creation. We're not the chosen species by some god, etc., etc. So in the West, we believe like the Darwinian framework, and at the same time, we have the way we treat animals is very Christian or anthropocentric. So it's a very, very strange. So we have a new science, let's say, but our behavior is still medieval. So that's something I wanted to highlight. And also there is this paradoxical victory of Pythagoras and Porphyry and the other philosophers. Not all of them, but most of the arguments are now well received, in the field of animal ethics. I mentioned the Porphyry and his zoopolis. I mean, his views on collaboration. That's something Donaldson and Kimlicka would use. The way Porphyry contest the question of logos. You find that also in philosophers like Tom Regan and others. So Porphyry won, basically, because you would have no one in the field of animal ethics now that would say that they are wrong. They won, but their victory is limited to a very, very small sphere, academic sphere, I would say. Okay, so a quick conclusion about the lessons we can draw from the long and rich history of vegetarianism and veganism. Yeah, you realize because of all those debates that people have felt some form of guilt towards animals. We're going to talk about that in the course. You would find very, very strange justifications of blood sacrifice by people who enjoy the taste of meat. And people feel guilty. Not all of them, not all the time, but there is some form of guilt, in many, many people. And usually this feeling is are stifled by social conformity and religion. So you would use the group would put pressure on you to conform, and very often people will say, "Well, I think it's awful. Animals suffer. I don't want to harm them. I feel bad." But at the same time, this is what the Greek priest or the Christian priest would say. They are made for us. They suffer, okay, but we shouldn't care. They are not members of our community. Another thing, the fact that I believe when you read Porphyry and the others and the Stoics, clearly, I mean, I might be biased, of course, but clearly, I think Porphyry wins. There are some very smart arguments by Epicurus, for instance, but they're not as solid as the arguments used by vegetarians and vegans. So it means that rational arguments don't really work. It's a bit sad, but it's this is a reality, and it doesn't really work because attachment to meat and animal exploitation is not something very rational. It's mainly emotional. We have an emotional attachment to a certain food, and we cannot we cannot stop that. Okay, we cannot stop that with rational arguments. Alas, that's something Porphyry would say. We just meat eaters shouldn't talk too much about animal ethics because they are obviously biased. They're going to justify in retrospect what they do on a daily basis. They eat meat and then they want to justify eating meat. It's not the other way around. So if we can live in a vegan world in the future, I think we have to understand that. That's a lesson. That's one of the lessons of the long history of vegetarianism. Human beings are not rational when it comes to food ethics or animal ethics. So we might want to focus also a lot on food consumption. Ideas, the battle of ideas doesn't work. I think Porphyry is right. We eat some specific foods, and then we use these food habits to shape our ideas. So that's, I think, a very good lesson from Porphyry. So we can talk about that. If we can make vegan food more available, that's something that was missing all the time. It might be a way to solve the problem. And once the question of the attachment to meat is overcome, you can talk about rational and ethical questions. Not otherwise, it's a bit early. At least obviously on a large scale. The other thing also, I think, because every civilization needs a religion, it's not possible without a religion. So maybe a new religious paradigm can help veganism. So I think we need to overcome anthropocentrism. It seems such a ridiculous idea, but it's still prevalent today. We should also probably get rid of humanism. Humanism is the intuition is beautiful, but the consequences are a bit counterproductive and just wrong scientifically speaking. I think human beings deserve better than those silly ideas that we are the chosen species by some god and everything has been created for the sake of the human race. I think we are better than that. So we should go beyond humanism and we have to redefine the concept of humanism. So maybe something that can also help a lot the development of veganism in the West is a new religion. Christianity will not be here forever. Religions are created, they flourish, and then they die. Of course, Christianity is much stronger. It's still strong in the US today. It's not so true in Europe, and we witness, some sort of Jainization or Buddhization of Europe, with more and more people who are doing yoga or who are interested in mindfulness or meditation and things like that. And Jain principles or intuition when it comes to animals, can triumph. And then, because we have a new religion, it can help the world to transition. That's a possibility. So it's not going to be for the 21st century, but it's very possible. Again, Christianity won't last forever. There will be new religions in our world, and maybe a vegan religion can help solve the ethical problems of animal exploitation. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Wow, wonderful presentation, Dr. Larue. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think just to kind of connect it immediately to something that's come up, I have notes and my own questions, but another professor here, Professor Miller, kind of noted, as I've noted too in my own work, these kind of commonalities and notions that you see with Pythagoras in these examples you gave, right? Of concerns about reincarnation, concerns about purity, metempsychosis,
Mhm.
animal welfare, and the commonalities with early Indian philosophy. So I think, just in your question, do you think that do you find it to be more coincidental, or do you think that there was probably some kind of maybe Silk Roadish kind of interlap and overlap going on that informed these these distant thoughts.
Yeah, so they are. So I don't think Pythagoras went to India, for instance, but we know that a little bit 2 centuries later, a lot of Greek people would go to India for different reasons. Money, also people would go to India and buy things, and they would be exchanging, and also historians and philosophers would go there and they would study Hinduism and Jainism, what they call the gymnosophist, like
Mm.
the naked wise men. So sannyasin basically, and they would be very interested in them. So the way they depict them or interpret their ideas is a bit silly, but we know that they've been there. So during the fourth century before Common Era, you would find a lot of people who would say that Pythagoras went to India and learned from the Brahmins, basically, his philosophy. So I don't think he went there. He may have gone to Egypt. We have a lot of Egyptian priests in antiquity who would be almost on a vegetarian diet. So maybe there was this influence, but I think it's difficult to know. The thing when you study antiquity, you have to be very humble because
Mm.
you don't you're missing a lot of pieces. So it's just something you can imagine. But the way Empedocles is talking about reincarnation, interconnectedness, also the fact Pythagoras is talking about that, show that they were probably influenced by shamans, back then. So you would find shamans in Greece, in different islands. And this idea that there is an afterlife, that you can travel through time with meditation or some substances, the soul can be reincarnated. These ideas are probably from shamans, and that's you would find, I guess, more or less the same idea. So it's a direct consequence. Plus, Pythagoras would use uh, logic,
Mm.
mathematics, and things like that to justify his views. And he would also create. He was interested in astrology and things like that, and numerology, because he wanted to find new ways to foresee the future. Very often, the priest would, at the end of the blood sacrifice, you would examine the guts, the heart, the lungs, etc. of the animal. You say, "Oh, that will happen. We're going to win this battle. This can happen." Blah blah blah. And Pythagoras said, "This is violent. It's impure. I don't want to deal with that." So he created numerology, or other forms of predictions about the future.
Interesting. Just to add one more from Professor Miller, and then we'll pivot to another question. But um, I think it's more about your conclusion at the end, which I think is contested. I don't want to say it's contested. It's just argued, and there's social science has a lot to say about it, about this notion that actually um, what you're saying is kind of what we first got with Porphyry, which is like there's such an attachment to certain habits, probably specific habits, not all habits, that
Hmm.
trying to appeal to people's rationality or ethics um, doesn't doesn't work. And
Hmm.
I mean, I'll obviously let you answer that question, but I think it is interesting. I mean, the example I always think about is how, we teach children, human children often not to harm other animals necessarily, excuse me, unnecessarily.
Hmm.
And then the moment you tell people, but this is what actually we do all the time with animals, they usually don't deny it, but they pivot to something else, right? They
Hmm.
pivot to some other example, which I feel like does give some credibility to what you're saying, which is that individuals will quickly depart from reason when it comes to this habit. And
Hmm.
so I don't know, how have you come to that position, and maybe if you can talk a little more about it.
Yeah, I was a bit. So I wrote a conclusion yesterday, and I was a bit pessimistic also. And
Mhm.
there were two things. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic now more than I was like 10 or 15 years ago. And when you study those texts, Porphyry, Pythagoras, etc., you feel like a part of a big prestigious family, and you are happy, and you become optimistic. And you can also have a different approach and say, well, all those amazing thinkers, religious thinkers, philosophers, poets, they were right. Their arguments are so sound, and it doesn't work. So, so you can be optimistic or pessimistic. I was more pessimistic yesterday, and also I think that there is it's also personally something I didn't really understand, the attachment to really the deep emotional attachment to these products. That's for me, it doesn't matter. I can easily stop eating some products tomorrow, things I like a lot. And I'm not normal. I'm really the minority. I shouldn't. And also, I think it's easier for vegan to maybe vegans could easily give up some foods. It might not be as easy for the rest of the population, and that's something we also have to take into consideration when you stop eating meat or dairy. When in your family, in your culture, those things were important. It's a big loss for a lot of people, and that's something I didn't really understand, and I was reflecting on those things in the last few weeks and months, and it can this attachment, this emotional attachment, can explain why Pythagoras won in the field of animal ethics, but miserably failed in let's say politically or at a larger scale.
Yes, I think also, I mean, we have a comment here from some first a comment saying that someone who did came to veganism through rational thought, but early on have realized that for a lot of people it doesn't work. And I think that's a really smart insight, which is that we all might have some anecdotal evidence of one person, or I told someone that they were a bad person or used shame and it worked, but we know from kind of social science and psychology that it doesn't
Yeah.
work, generally speaking. So the second part of the kind of comment is then, how do we help shift the world without kind of referring to these other people as irrational or sounding like we are
Yeah, of course,
holier than thou? So
no.
what do you recommend?
Oh no, it's not other people. Vegans are also irrational in many ways. But when it comes to food, I really believe that vegetarians and even more vegan have had a rational approach. But I'm very rational for many things. I take the plane. I buy things I don't need to. The cotton of my shirt is probably not very sustainable, and so on and so forth. We do a lot of things that are not rational at all. So I'm not saying that others are idiots and I am very smart, or vegans are. I didn't say that. We are irrational 95% of the time. The thing is, this kind of irrationality we have when it comes to food is so harmful, so unfair, that it should be addressed first. I think this is the top priority. The vast majority of the pain we are inflicting in the world is through animal agriculture and fishing. So that was my point. But yeah, again, I am irrational. I'm very irrational. A little bit less when it comes to food. That's it. So I'm not blaming others. I'm not even mad. I'm just a little bit. I'm just a little bit sad. I'm just a little bit sad. It's not disdain. No, not at all. Maybe it was 10 or 20 years ago, but I don't. Yeah, it's we are emotional creatures, especially when it comes to food, and we should understand that and find ways to overcome those things. Um, people are people suffer, and there is something that is very easy for them to feel better is go to the grocery store and buy ice cream, or go, they have share hamburgers, go to a barbecue with friends. It creates it creates joy for them. What their life is very, very sad. I understand. I understand. I understand
I know
more.
we have used, right, social, it's a lot about belonging too, or
Hmm.
community.
Exactly.
And I think that a great kind of framework that's been given to me is that if we all look at ourselves as victims, right, as victims of this conditioning, both a conditioning that comes from, Augustine, as you're saying, for example, but beyond that, but then also through, say, consumer capitalism
Of course.
and kind of technology and social isolation, is that we're all kind of victims. So it's a way to generate compassion towards others, that you're not better just because you were able to somehow find a way out quicker or some kind of realization. But like you've just said, that what we are doing is just so harmful that it becomes important to try to make that effort.
Of course,
But you're not, obviously not, but in many other ways, we're not any less hypocritical or contradictory.
Of
So
course.
let me just give voice to this one other question, which is very specific, but maybe I think it got me thinking of a way to frame it creatively. Someone is talking about a sanctuary, that Simone's saying that they've recently discovered that a sanctuary nearby takes their eggs from their birds that are in sanctuary and feeds them to their guests. And she basically says, like, how do you feel about that? Because with her own, the birds that she's caretaking, they give them back to the birds themselves, to eat. But basically, I guess this is like a larger question. This is, how do you feel about that? But I'm also curious what you think people like maybe Pythagoras or Porphyry would think about these kinds of, either it's like backyard chicken ideas or freegan kind of ideas, or like out of market. I mean, what do you think we could learn from some of their perspectives?
Okay, very good. So I would say two things. One thing is in antiquity. I'm going to focus on antiquity. You would find anti-vegetarian arguments by meat eaters who are saying vegans are consistent. So if you don't want to hurt any animals, you shouldn't take the eggs, you shouldn't take the milk or the wool. And so vegetarians are hypocrites, are not consistent, because if they are against animal exploitation, they shouldn't do that. So the conclusion is that the conclusion is veganism is consistent, vegetarians are not. But obviously, veganism is not possible. You cannot survive. You cannot, live a life without eggs, milk, etc. So because veganism is consistent but impossible, vegetarianism doesn't make any sense. So we are totally entitled to eat meat. Okay, that was one thing that was used in a book specially written against vegetarians. And Porphyry would address that question and say, no, we can eat eggs and dairy because it's a collaboration. That's what I said. So we and it's not the first one to talk about that. Aristotle also mentioned the fact that we live in mixed societies. We don't live in a world with only human beings. Even in cities, you have horses, you have birds, you have a lot of animals in our society. So we live in mixed societies. That's also an argument against Stoics. Stoics said, no, we are citizens of the world, we are the human family, and the rest is the other beings are foreigners. He said, no, we live with them all the time. So the best way to collaborate is to help animals help us, basically. So we protect them. That's what I said. We protect them, and we should receive a salary because we are protecting them. So taking the eggs from the chickens, for Porphyry, it's totally acceptable. And for him and for others, they would say, look, the chickens are giving us eggs, sheep or cows are giving us milk. So we have to be extremely grateful. So we have to treat them even better because we are giving them something. So they would emphasize that. So we should be even more ethical towards chickens and cows because they help us. And when someone is killing a cow or an ox after working for us for so many years, it's like so ungrateful. They should, we should give them a pension. They should get retired and we should take care of them.
Retirement party.
Exactly. And then it's an ethical thing to do.
Mm.
And another argument based on that, it was Plutarch who mentioned that if we do that, if we take care of, if we live with our chickens, cows, pigs, etc., and we treat them very, very well, it's a good practice for humanity. So we're going to be even better, even more compassionate, even more benevolent with other human beings, because of course it's easier to create a bond with your fellow humans.
This is what Kant will say later. Yes, later on in hundreds of years later.
But also Thomas of Aquinas. But
Well,
they would use animals as a way to practice your humanity. But Porphyry,
mm.
it's not. He doesn't. There is nothing instrumental. We have to take care of them, and it has an indirect benefit, which is good for your philanthropia. Yeah.
Well, this is a great discussion, and we're coming upon the end of the session, but I really want to thank you for being here. I find this topic to be immensely important. I mean, especially for those that take your course. I think we'll get into a lot more of the details of it and the sophistication.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something essential about the kind understanding that the human-animal binary, anthropocentrism, humanism,
Yeah.
is a construct, and as much as it's the way things are, they weren't always that way, right?
No.
Um, they weren't always that way, and yet at the same time, that past hasn't gone anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still today. And oftentimes, just to give a little pivot here, in Indian philosophy and Jain studies, we find the same issue, right? We might not have a god who is deeming, say, certain kinds of animals for human use, but there are ways in which, right, dharma or the law or the way sometimes talks about how cows give, right? This notion of giving cows. And you said this earlier a little bit about how animals provide. And in many ways, the argument comes down really to sometimes people who say promote the use of cows is like, that's why cows are here.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they exist. It's their raison d'etre, right? It's their dharma. But
Mm-hmm.
to say that's the way things are means that you have to go back to the genesis
Yeah.
of that way. And
Mm-hmm.
in your course, I think you're really, and in this talk and in your course, really providing people who come from specifically Euro-American traditions to like look back at their own ancestry to
Mm-hmm.
understand both where their anthropocentrism has come from, but they also come from a long lineage of people who challenged that.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are not from that ancestry, this is a great way to learn about comparative philosophy, interfaith dialogue, really like learning more about one another so we can kind of move towards this compassionate vegan horizon together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all a long-winded thank you because I really feel like this is a wonderful addition to what we're doing here. I want to thank all of you for joining today. This talk will be recorded so you can access it later. And please check our website for Dr. Larue's upcoming course, Beasts and Beliefs, which is on animals and the history of vegetarianism in the ancient West. Once again, thank you, Dr. Larue, and we'll see you in the
Thank you,
course.
Jonathan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.